The notification sound from LinkedIn makes my heart skip a beat. Not because I'm expecting good news, I've learned not to get my hopes up, but because I recognize the profile photo in my inbox. It's Marcus Chen, the guy who literally laughed in my face 3 years ago when I told him about my idea for a sustainable packaging startup. Emma, seriously? He had said, barely containing his amusement as he leaned back in the coffee shop chair. Biodegradable packaging? In this economy, you're going to compete with companies that have been doing this for decades with a fraction of the cost. His condescending smile still haunts me sometimes. Maybe stick to your marketing job, at least that's stable. Now, staring at my laptop screen in my corner office, yes, corner office, I'm reading his cover letter. His very polite, very professional cover letter asking to join EcoWrap Solutions as our head of business development. The same company he dismissed as another naive millennial pipe dream. I set my coffee down and leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the kind I couldn't afford when Marcus was busy crushing my confidence. Outside my window, I can see the company parking lot filled with Priuses and Teslas, my employees' cars. 73 employees and counting, all working for the pipe dream he mocked. My assistant Sarah knocks and enters with a stack of resumes. More applications for the BD position, she says, placing them on my desk. HR pre-screened these, all excellent candidates. I nod, but my attention stays fixed on Marcus's application. The irony isn't lost on me. 3 years ago, I was the one sending out desperate resumes, getting rejected left and right. Now I'm the one with the power to accept or reject. Comment below, have you ever had someone doubt your dreams? What happened? Let me back up and tell you how I got here, because this story doesn't start with success. It starts with a panic attack in aisle 7 of Target. I was 28, standing between the paper towels and toilet paper, having what I now recognize as an existential crisis. I'd been working as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm for 5 years, watching my savings account hover around the same pathetic number month after month. My apartment was decent but cramped, my car was reliable but unremarkable, and my life was fine, just fine. But fine wasn't enough anymore. I'd been thinking about this for months, the sheer amount of waste I saw everywhere. Every package, every container, every single thing wrapped in layers of plastic that would outlive my great-great-grandchildren. As someone who'd studied environmental science before pivoting to marketing, a decision my parents still questioned, I couldn't shake the feeling that I should be doing something about it. Standing in Target, I pulled out my phone and started Googling. How much plastic packaging waste is generated annually? The numbers were staggering. Then I searched for biodegradable alternatives. The options were limited, expensive, or both. That's when the idea hit me like a lightning bolt. What if I could create packaging that wasn't just biodegradable, but actually beneficial to the environment when it decomposed? What if instead of just breaking down, it could enrich soil or even grow into plants? I know how it sounds. Trust me, I know. But standing there in Target, surrounded by all that wasteful packaging, it felt like the most important idea I'd ever had. I called my best friend Jenna the moment I got to my car. Jen, I think I want to start a company, I said, my hands still shaking from excitement. Emma, you've had like 6 business ideas this month, she laughed. Remember the app for rating public bathrooms? This is different, I insisted. This is about packaging. Sustainable packaging that actually helps the environment instead of just being less bad than regular plastic. There was a pause. Packaging, Emma, that sounds really niche and expensive. Don't companies already do that? Not like this, I said, but I could hear the doubt creeping into my own voice. That doubt only grew over the next few weeks as I started sharing my idea with people. My parents were concerned about me leaving my stable job. My coworkers thought I was having a quarter-life crisis, a decade late, but whatever. My then-boyfriend Jake was supportive in that passive way that actually feels worse than outright dismissal. That's great, babe, he'd say whenever I brought it up, then immediately change the subject to something about his own job in finance. But the worst reaction came from my industry contacts. I'd been in marketing long enough to know some people in business development, supply chain, and entrepreneurship circles. I figured they'd be the ones to give me real, actionable feedback. I was so wrong. The first person I pitched to was Sandra Williams, a senior director at a packaging company I'd worked with in my marketing role. She agreed to meet me for lunch, probably because I'd helped her team with several successful campaigns. Sandra, I've been thinking about sustainable packaging. I started, after we'd ordered. What if we could create materials that don't just break down, but actually contribute to environmental restoration? She nodded politely while cutting her salad. Emma, I appreciate your passion for the environment, but you have to understand, packaging is about cost and efficiency first. Sustainability is nice to have, but it's not a game changer for most companies. They'll pay maybe 10% more for green packaging, but that's it. But what if the environmental benefits were so significant that companies could use it as a major marketing advantage? I pressed. She smiled the way adults smile at children who think they can fly. Sweetie, every packaging startup thinks they're going to revolutionize the industry. But the big players, DuPont, Sealed Air, International Paper, they have the resources and the relationships. What makes you think you can compete with that? I left that lunch feeling deflated, but not defeated. Maybe I just needed to approach it differently. That's when I decided to reach out to Marcus Chen. Marcus and I had been in the same marketing cohort program 2 years earlier. He'd since moved into business development for a major consumer goods company, and I'd always found him sharp and direct. I thought he'd give me honest feedback on the business side of my idea. We met at a Starbucks near his office. I'd prepared a basic pitch deck on my personal laptop, complete with market research and preliminary sketches of my packaging concept. Marcus, thanks for meeting me, I said, setting up my laptop between our coffee cups. I wanted to run a business idea by you. Shoot, he said, checking his phone. I'm thinking about starting a sustainable packaging company, I began. But not just any sustainable packaging. I want to create materials that actually improve soil quality when they decompose. Imagine shipping boxes that customers can bury in their gardens, and they'll release nutrients and even seeds for native plants. Marcus looked up from his phone, and I saw something flicker across his face. Amusement, disbelief. Emma, seriously, he said, and I could hear the barely contained laughter in his voice. Biodegradable packaging? In this economy, you're going to compete with companies that have been doing this for decades with a fraction of the cost. My heart sank, but I pressed on. The market research shows that consumers are increasingly willing to pay more for truly sustainable options, and companies are under pressure to meet environmental goals. Market research, he interrupted, actually chuckling now. Emma, do you know how much it costs to develop new packaging materials? We're talking millions in R&D, years of testing, regulatory approvals. And you want to do this from your apartment? I have some savings, and I'm looking into small business loans. Maybe stick to your marketing job, he said, that condescending smile spreading across his face. At least that's stable. The words hit me like a physical blow. I closed my laptop, mumbled some excuse about needing to get back to work, and left. I cried in my car for 20 minutes. But you know what? Sometimes the best fuel for determination is humiliation. That night, I went home and started researching everything I could about packaging materials, sustainable chemistry, and startup funding. If Marcus thought I was naive, I'd prove him wrong by becoming the most informed person in the room. What would you do if someone laughed at your dream? Comment below. The betrayal that really broke me didn't come from strangers in the industry. It came from Jake. I'd been working on my business plan for 3 months, staying up late researching, reaching out to potential suppliers, and even connecting with a couple of environmental chemistry professors who were interested in collaborating. My apartment had become a war room of printed articles, sketches, and sample materials I'd ordered online. Jake had been tolerant, that's the word I'd use. He didn't mock me like Marcus did, but he didn't encourage me either. Whenever I'd excitedly share a breakthrough or a new connection I'd made, he'd nod and say, "That's nice, Em," before turning back to his phone or the TV. I should have seen the signs. It was a Friday night, and I'd planned a quiet evening working on my pitch deck. I'd finally gotten a meeting with a potential investor, a small fund that focused on environmental startups. It was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and I was determined to be overprepared. Jake came home from his office around 7, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. "Hey babe," I called from my makeshift desk in the corner of our living room. "How was your day? I made some progress on the cost projections for different production scales. Wanna see?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured himself a glass of wine and sat heavily on the couch. "Emma, we need to talk," he said. Something in his tone made me look up from my laptop. "Okay, what's up?" He took a long sip of wine. "This startup thing, it's getting out of hand." "Out of hand, Jake, I'm just doing research and—" "Emma, look around." He gestured at the papers covering our coffee table and dining table. "Our entire apartment looks like a college dorm during finals week. You stay up until 2 a.m. working on this every night. You talk about nothing else. And for what? Some fantasy about changing the world." I felt my cheeks getting hot. "It's not a fantasy. I'm building something real here. I have meetings lined up, potential partnerships." "With who? Some professors who are humoring you?" "Emma, be honest with yourself. You're not a scientist. You're not an engineer. You're a marketing coordinator who's having some kind of midlife crisis." "I'm 28, I said quietly. "Exactly. You should be focused on building our future together. Saving money, maybe thinking about getting engaged, buying a house. Instead, you're chasing this pipe dream that's going to drain our savings and probably fail anyway." Our savings? That stung because technically, it was my savings. Jake had never contributed to what I'd been setting aside for the business. "Jake, I never asked you to invest in this. I'm using my own money." "Emma, when we get married, your debt becomes my debt. Your financial mistakes become my financial mistakes. I can't stand by and watch you sabotage our future for some grandiose idea about saving the world." "When we get married, not if, when, like it was already decided, like my dreams were just obstacles to his plans." "So what are you saying?" I asked. He set down his wine glass and looked at me with what I now recognize was pity. "I'm saying you need to choose. You can keep playing entrepreneur and probably lose everything, or you can focus on reality. Focus on us." "And if I don't stop?" The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours. "Then I don't think this is going to work out," he said finally. I stared at him, waiting for him to take it back, to say he didn't mean it. But he just sat there, looking at me expectantly, like I was supposed to immediately apologize and pack up all my research. "You know what, Jake?" I said, standing up and closing my laptop. "You're right, this isn't going to work out." He blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "Emma, don't be dramatic. I'm trying to help you see reason." "Get out," I said. "What?" "Get out. This is my apartment, my lease, my savings that I'm apparently throwing away, so get out." The fight that followed was ugly. Jake called me delusional, selfish, and immature. I called him unsupportive and cowardly. By the end of the weekend, he'd moved out, taking half the furniture and most of my confidence with him. That Sunday night, sitting alone in my half-empty apartment, I called my mom. "Sweetie, maybe Jake had a point," she said after I'd told her everything. "Starting a business is risky, and you do have a good job." I hung up without saying goodbye. Then I called Jenna. I'm so sorry about Jake," she said. "But honestly, maybe this is a sign. Maybe you should take some time to think about whether this business thing is really what you want, or if you're just trying to prove something." I hung up on her too. That night, I sat in my empty living room, surrounded by all my research, and I made a decision. Everyone thought I was being naive and impractical? Fine. I'd show them just how impractical I could be. I opened my laptop and started writing my resignation letter. Rate this betrayal, 110 in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between a relationship and a dream? Quitting my job was simultaneously the most terrifying and most liberating thing I'd ever done. I gave my 2 weeks' notice on a Monday morning, and my boss, Jennifer, looked at me like I'd told her I was joining a cult. "Emma, you're one of our most reliable coordinators," she said, reviewing my resignation letter. "Are you sure about this? What's the new job?" "I'm starting my own company," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Her expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Oh, Emma, that's..." Ambitious, but wouldn't it be smarter to keep this job while you get the business off the ground? Maintain some stability. Even my boss thought I was being reckless. But I'd done the math. I had enough savings to survive for about 8 months if I lived minimally. That had to be enough time to either succeed or fail definitively. I appreciate the concern, Jennifer, but I need to focus completely on this. She sighed. Well, if things don't work out, you're always welcome back here. The pity in her voice followed me out of the office. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, research, and reality checks. The investor meeting I'd been preparing for went okay. They were interested but wanted to see more development before committing any funding. I needed prototypes, market validation, and a clearer path to profitability. So I got to work. I connected with Dr. Sarah Martinez, a chemistry professor at the local university, who agreed to help me develop initial prototypes in exchange for a small equity stake. I found a small manufacturer willing to work with me on sample runs, and I started reaching out to potential customers, small businesses that might be interested in sustainable packaging options. That's when the real test began, because developing a revolutionary product is one thing. Convincing people to believe in it when you're nobody special is something else entirely. My first big presentation was to Greenleaf Market, a small chain of organic grocery stores. The owner, David Kim, had agreed to meet with me after I'd cold emailed him about sustainable packaging solutions for their prepared foods section. I showed up to his office with a box of prototypes Dr. Martinez, and I had developed containers made from agricultural waste that would decompose into nutrient-rich compost within 60 days. This is impressive, David said, examining one of the containers. But what's your production capacity? Can you handle orders of 10,000 units per month? My heart sank. Currently, I'm working with a small manufacturer who could handle maybe 500 units per month, but with proper funding, I could scale up to. Emma, I like you, David interrupted, and I love what you're trying to do, but I can't commit to a supplier who can't meet my basic volume requirements. Come back when you can handle real orders. It wasn't a no exactly, but it felt like one. The next presentation went worse. I'd pitched a mid-sized restaurant chain about biodegradable takeout containers. The procurement manager, Lisa Chang, seemed interested until I mentioned pricing. So these would cost about 40% more than our current containers? She asked. Initially, yes, but as production scales up, that cost difference would decrease and your customers would appreciate. 40% more, she repeated. Emma, our profit margins on takeout are already thin. I can't justify a 40% increase in packaging costs, no matter how environmentally friendly it is. Another soft rejection. But the worst meeting was with Tom Bradley, the owner of a regional distribution company I'd hoped would carry my products. I'd been referred to him by someone in my old marketing network, and I thought the connection would help. Tom was friendly enough when I arrived at his warehouse office, offering me coffee and asking about my background. But as soon as I started explaining my product concept, I could see his attention wandering. Let me stop you right there, Emma, he said, holding up his hand. I've been in this business for 22 years. I've seen dozens of revolutionary packaging startups come and go. You know what they all had in common? They underestimated how complicated and expensive this industry actually is. But I've been researching for months, I protested. I understand the challenges. Do you? Do you understand FDA approval processes for food contact materials? Do you know about interstate shipping regulations for biodegradable products? Have you calculated the insurance costs for a manufacturing startup? I felt my face getting hot. I hadn't researched all of those things in detail yet. I'm working with experts to address those issues, I said weakly. Tom leaned back in his chair. Emma, can I give you some advice? Go back to whatever job you came from. This industry will eat you alive. You're a nice kid with good intentions, but good intentions don't pay the bills. I left that meeting feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. But it was my conversation with my parents that really shook me. I'd driven to their house for Sunday dinner, hoping for some emotional support. Instead, I got an intervention. Sweetheart, we're worried about you. my mom said as we cleared the dishes. It's been 2 months since you quit your job, and you don't seem any closer to actually making money from this business. These things take time, Mom. I'm building relationships, developing products. You're burning through your savings, my dad interjected. And for what? Emma, you're a smart girl. You have a degree, experience, skills. Why are you throwing all of that away for something so uncertain? I'm not throwing it away. I'm using my skills to build something meaningful. My mom sat down next to me. Honey, maybe it's time to consider that Jake was right. Maybe this business idea isn't as viable as you thought. Hearing Jake's name in that context, like his opinion was being vindicated by my struggles, felt like salt in an open wound. You think I should quit? I asked. We think you should be realistic, Dad said. Get a job, rebuild your savings, and maybe pursue this as a hobby on the side. A hobby, my life's work, reduced to a hobby. That night, I sat in my apartment, which I'd had to move out of in favor of a cheaper studio, and made a list of everyone who had expressed doubt about my business. It was a long list. But then I made another list. Dr. Martinez, who was genuinely excited about our prototypes. Amy Rodriguez, a small cafe owner who'd said she'd definitely buy my containers if I could get the price down. And surprisingly, Jennifer from my old job, who'd called me the week before to say she'd been thinking about our conversation and admired my courage. The support list was shorter, much shorter, but it existed. I decided to focus on the people who believed in me, even if they were outnumbered 10-1 by the skeptics. Comment your city and tell me, when everyone doubted you, who was the one person who believed in you? 18 months later, everything changed. It wasn't a sudden breakthrough, more like a series of small victories that suddenly added up to something significant. Dr. Martinez and I had refined our prototypes to the point where they could be manufactured at competitive prices. Amy Rodriguez had become not just a customer, but a case study, telling everyone who would listen about how her customers loved the biodegradable containers. And word was starting to spread. The real turning point came when Sustainable Business magazine featured EcoWrap Solutions in an article about innovative environmental startups. The reporter had found us through Amy, interviewed several of our early customers, and written a glowing piece about our seed-infused packaging that literally grows into plants. Within a week of the article's publication, my inbox was flooded with inquiries. Major retailers, restaurant chains, and even some corporations I'd never dreamed of reaching out to were asking for information about our products. That's when I got the call that changed everything. Is this Emma Chen from EcoWrap Solutions? The voice was professional, confident. It's Emma Parker, actually, but yes, how can I help you? This is Michael Rodriguez from Green Tech Ventures. We read about your company in Sustainable Business magazine, and we'd like to set up a meeting to discuss investment opportunities. Green Tech Ventures. I'd researched them during my early fundraising attempts, but never dreamed they'd be interested in a company as small as mine. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at their downtown offices. I spent the entire week preparing, refining my pitch deck, practicing my presentation, and trying to contain my excitement. Their offices were intimidating, floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, and walls lined with framed articles about their successful investments. I felt underdressed in my best and only business suit. Michael Rodriguez turned out to be younger than I'd expected, probably mid-30s, with the kind of casual confidence that comes from making a lot of successful bets. He was joined by two partners, Sarah Kim and David Walsh. Emma, great to meet you, Michael said, shaking my hand. We've been following the sustainable packaging space for a while, and your approach is really innovative. I presented for 30 minutes, covering everything from our proprietary material composition to our growing customer base to our projections for scaling up production. They asked thoughtful questions about manufacturing processes, regulatory compliance, and market size, the kinds of questions that showed they'd done their homework. What kind of funding are you looking for? Sarah asked. $2 million for initial scaling, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That would allow us to increase production capacity, hire a full-time team, and expand our product line. The three partners exchanged glances. Emma, we'd like to propose something different, Michael said. Based on what we've seen, we think EcoWrap has the potential to be a major player in sustainable packaging. We'd like to invest $5 million for a 30% equity stake. I nearly fell out of my chair. $5 million, more than double what I'd asked for. That's incredible, I managed. Yes, absolutely yes. The due diligence process took another 6 weeks, but by the end of March, I had $5 million in the bank and a mandate to grow aggressively. I hired Dr. Martinez as our Chief Technology Officer. I brought in an experienced operations manager, Lisa Thompson, who'd worked for several major packaging companies. I leased a proper manufacturing facility and hired a team of 12 employees. By the end of the year, we had 43 employees, 3 major retail partnerships, and revenue of $8.2 million. That's when the callbacks started. The first one was from Sandra Williams, the packaging executive who'd patronized me over lunch 2 years earlier. She called on a Tuesday morning, and I almost didn't take the call. Emma, I saw the article about EcoWrap in Industry Weekly. Congratulations on your success. Industry Weekly had run a cover story about our company the month before, calling us the sustainable packaging disruptor to watch. Thank you, Sandra. How are things at your company? Oh, you know how it is. But I have to say, I've been thinking about our conversation a few years ago, and I'm so impressed with what you've built. I'd love to grab coffee and catch up sometime. Catch up like we were old friends who'd lost touch, instead of someone who dismissed my idea as naive. I appreciate the call, Sandra, but I'm pretty swamped with the business right now. Of course, of course. But Emma, if you're ever looking for experienced packaging executives, I hope you'll keep me in mind. I've been following your growth, and I think my experience could be valuable as you scale up. And there it was. The woman who told me that sustainability was just a nice to have was now asking to join the sustainable packaging company she'd dismissed. I'll keep that in mind, I said politely and ended the call. But Sandra was just the beginning. David Kim from Greenleaf Market called to congratulate me on our success and casually mentioned that he'd always believed in what I was building and would love to explore a partnership. Tom Bradley, the distributor who told me the industry would eat me alive, sent an email asking if we needed any distribution partners in his region. Even my parents, who'd encouraged me to treat the business as a hobby, were suddenly telling everyone they met about their entrepreneur daughter. But the most surreal callback came on a Friday afternoon in November. I was in my office, my actual corner office in our expanded headquarters, when Sarah knocked on the door. Emma, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says you know each other from your marketing days. My heart skipped when I saw him in the lobby. Marcus Chen, looking exactly the same as he had in that Starbucks 2 years ago, except now he was the one who seemed nervous. Emma, he said, standing up as I approached, thank you for seeing me. I know I should have called ahead. Marcus, this is unexpected. He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from our marketing cohort days. I wanted to congratulate you in person on everything you've built here. EcoWrap is really impressive. Thank you. Emma, I owe you an apology. That day in Starbucks, I was dismissive and condescending. I didn't see the vision you had, and I was wrong. I waited for him to continue. The truth is, I've been following your company's growth for the past year. What you've accomplished is extraordinary, and I keep thinking about how I reacted when you first told me about your idea. I remember, I said simply. Emma, I know this might sound presumptuous, but I'd love the chance to be part of what you're building here. I have experience in business development, relationships with major retailers, and I understand the market challenges you're facing as you scale. There it was. The man who'd literally laughed at my idea was now asking to join the team. You want to work for the naive pipe dream? I asked. His face reddened. Emma, I deserved that. I was an ass and I'm sorry, but I'd like the chance to make up for it by helping you grow this company. I looked at him for a long moment, remembering that day in Starbucks, the humiliation, the tears in my car afterward. Then I thought about all the callbacks I'd been getting, all the people who were suddenly interested in what I was building now that it was successful. Send me your resume, I said finally. HR will review it with all the other applications. The look of relief on his face was almost comical. Thank you, Emma, I really appreciate. Marcus, I interrupted, you'll be evaluated like any other candidate. Your past connection to me isn't an advantage. If anything, it might be a disadvantage. He nodded quickly. Of course, I understand. As he left, I couldn't help but smile. The tables had completely turned, and it felt better than I'd imagined. What would you do if someone who mocked your dreams came asking for a job? Comment below. The interview process was delicious. I didn't handle Marcus's interviews personally. That would have been unprofessional and potentially problematic. Instead, I let our HR director, Janet Martinez, Dr. Martinez's sister, actually, and our head of business development, Kevin Walsh, conduct the formal interviews. But I did sit in on the final round. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. He shook hands with Janet and Kevin, then turned to me with a carefully neutral expression. Emma, thank you for including me in this process. Of course, please have a seat. The conference room we used for executive interviews had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, with our framed magazine covers and industry awards displayed on one wall. I watched Marcus take it all in, and I could see him processing the reality of what I'd built. Kevin started with the standard questions about his background and experience. Marcus was polished, professional, and clearly well-prepared. He talked about his current role, his achievements in business development, and his understanding of the packaging industry. Tell us about your interest in sustainable packaging, Janet asked. I've become increasingly passionate about environmental issues over the past few years, Marcus said smoothly. I believe sustainable packaging represents the future of the industry, and EcoWrap is clearly the leader in innovation. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Passionate about environmental issues. 2 years ago, he dismissed the entire concept as impractical. What specific experience do you have with sustainable products? I asked, speaking for the first time since we'd sat down. Marcus paused. Well, in my current role, we've explored some eco-friendly packaging options for certain product lines. Explored how? I pressed. We've evaluated some suppliers and conducted cost analyses. And what were the conclusions of those analyses? Another pause. We determined that the premium pricing made it challenging to implement broadly. So he'd recommended against sustainable packaging at his current company. Interesting. Kevin asked about his leadership experience, his approach to client relationships, and his strategies for entering new markets. Marcus answered confidently, demonstrating genuine expertise in business development. Then Janet asked the question I'd been waiting for. Marcus, EcoWrap has grown rapidly, but we're still a relatively young company. How do you feel about joining a startup environment after working for established corporations? I'm excited about it, he said. I think there's something energizing about being part of a company that's disrupting an industry and creating positive change. Have you always felt that way about startups? I asked innocently. Marcus looked directly at me, and I could see him weighing his response. He knew I was testing him. I'll be honest, he said finally. I haven't always appreciated the potential of early-stage companies. I've learned to recognize innovation and vision more clearly over the past few years. It wasn't quite an admission of his past skepticism, but it was close. Can you give us an example of a time when you initially underestimated something that later proved successful? Janet asked. The silence stretched for several seconds. Marcus was clearly uncomfortable, but to his credit, he didn't dodge the question. Actually, yes. A few years ago, I met with an entrepreneur who was developing innovative, sustainable packaging solutions. At the time, I was skeptical about the market viability and the competitive landscape. I didn't see the vision clearly. He looked at me. I was wrong, and I learned from that experience. Kevin and Janet glanced at me, clearly realizing there was history here. What did you learn? I asked. I learned not to dismiss innovation just because it challenges conventional wisdom. And I learned that passionate, committed entrepreneurs can overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable to people who think too conventionally. It was a good answer, diplomatic, self aware, and respectful. After Marcus left, the three of us debriefed. He's qualified, Kevin said. Strong experience, good references, understands the industry. But there's obviously history between you two, Janet added, looking at me. Is that going to be a problem? I thought about it for a moment, not if he can do the job. What kind of history? Kevin asked. He was dismissive of the company concept when I first shared it with him, but that was before we'd proven market viability. His reaction wasn't unreasonable, just unimaginative. Janet nodded, so the question is whether you can work with him professionally. The question is whether he can work with me professionally, I corrected. I'm the CEO. He'd be reporting to Kevin, who reports to me. He needs to be comfortable with that dynamic. We ultimately extended offers to 3 candidates, including Marcus. His salary offer was fair but not generous, exactly what we'd pay any qualified candidate with his experience level. The equity package was minimal, and the title was Senior Business Development Manager, not the director-level position he'd probably expected. When Janet called to extend the offer, she also scheduled a follow-up conversation with me. Marcus, I want to be direct about something, I said when we met in my office the next day. I know you're taking a step down in title and probably salary to join us. I want to make sure you understand why. He nodded. I understand. EcoWrap is a growing company, and I need to prove myself here. That's part of it, but there's something else. 2 years ago, when I shared this business concept with you, you didn't just decline to get involved. You actively discouraged me from pursuing it. Marcus shifted in his chair. I'm not looking for another apology, I said, holding up my hand. What I'm looking for is assurance that you can genuinely support a vision you once dismissed. Because if there's any part of you that still thinks this company is a naive pipe dream, then this isn't going to work. He was quiet for a long moment. Emma, I was wrong, not just about the business potential, but about you. I underestimated your determination and your ability to execute. I won't make that mistake again. Good, because I don't need employees who are here because they want to be part of something successful. I need people who believe in what we're building. I do believe in it, he said, and I believe in you. The words felt strange coming from someone who'd once laughed at my dreams, but I could see he meant them. Welcome to EcoWrap, I said, standing up to shake his hand. Marcus started the following Monday. I made a point of introducing him to the team as our new Senior Business Development Manager, emphasizing his role in the hierarchy. Some of the employees who'd been with us since the early days gave me knowing looks. They remembered me telling the story of the condescending coffee meeting. But I'll give Marcus credit, he worked his ass off. Within his first month, he'd secured meetings with 3 major retail chains that had been on our target list for months. He seemed genuinely committed to learning about our products, our mission, and our culture. And he never once acted entitled or complained about his title or responsibilities. The real test came during our quarterly all-hands meeting in February. As part of the agenda, I always shared our company's origin story with new employees. It was important for people to understand how we'd started, the challenges we'd overcome, and the values that drove our decisions. EcoWrap began with a simple idea, I said, standing in front of our entire team of 73 employees. What if packaging could actually help the environment instead of harming it? But turning that idea into reality wasn't simple at all. I told them about the early rejections, the skeptical meetings, the people who thought I was naive or impractical. There was one conversation in particular that stuck with me. I continued, glancing at Marcus, who was sitting in the back row. Someone I respected told me that biodegradable packaging was unrealistic, that I should stick to my stable marketing job instead of chasing pipe dreams. A few people chuckled. They'd heard variations of this story before. That conversation hurt, but it also motivated me. Because sometimes the best way to prove people wrong is to succeed so thoroughly that they have no choice but to acknowledge they misjudged you. After the meeting, Marcus approached me. Emma, I know that story was about me. It was about a lot of people, actually. But yes, you were one of them. I just want you to know, I'm grateful you gave me the chance to be on the right side of your success this time. It was a classy response. I had to respect that. Over the following months, Marcus proved himself to be a valuable team member. He landed several major clients, contributed thoughtful ideas in strategy meetings, and seemed genuinely invested in our mission. More importantly, he never acted like he deserved special treatment because of our history. But the sweetest moment of poetic justice came 6 months after Marcus joined the team. I was in my office when Sarah knocked on the door. Emma, Sandra Williams is here. She says she has a meeting scheduled. Sandra Williams, the packaging executive who'd patronized me over lunch years ago, then called asking for a job after we became successful. I'd forgotten that Janet had scheduled this meeting. We were expanding our advisory board and considering several industry veterans. Sandra had been persistent in her outreach, and Janet thought her experience could be valuable. She walked into my office with the same confident stride I remembered, but there was something different in her demeanor. Less dismissive, more respectful. Emma, it's so good to see you again, she said, extending her hand. Congratulations on everything you've built here. EcoWrap has really become a force in the industry. Thank you, Sandra. Please have a seat. She settled into the chair across from my desk, the same chair where she'd once explained to me why sustainability was just a nice to have. I've been following your company's growth closely, she said. The innovation you've brought to sustainable packaging is remarkable. When we had lunch a few years ago, I could see you were passionate about the space, but I had no idea you'd execute at this level. The revisionist history was almost amusing. She could see I was passionate. She'd treated me like a child playing with toys. What makes you interested in joining our advisory board now? I asked. Emma, I have 30 years of experience in packaging. I've seen trends come and go, and I can tell you that what you're doing here isn't a trend. It's the future of the industry. I'd love to contribute my expertise to help you navigate the challenges of scaling up. And what specific expertise would that be? She launched into a detailed explanation of her experience with supply chain optimization, regulatory compliance, and strategic partnerships. She was knowledgeable, I'll give her that. Sandra, I have to ask you something directly, I said when she finished. When we had lunch 3 years ago, you told me that sustainability was nice to have, but not a game changer. You seemed skeptical that a startup could compete with established players. What changed your mind? She paused, clearly remembering that conversation. Emma, I was looking at the market as it existed then, not as it could become. You've proven that consumer demand for truly sustainable packaging was stronger than I anticipated. And you've shown that innovation can overcome the traditional barriers to entry. It was a diplomatic answer, but not entirely honest. So you think the market changed, not that your assessment was wrong. Another pause. I think I underestimated the entrepreneur, not just the market opportunity. Better, more honest. Sandra, I appreciate your interest in working with us. But I have to tell you, our advisory board consists of people who believed in sustainable packaging before it was obviously profitable. People who supported innovation when it was risky, not after it proved successful. Her face fell slightly. Emma, I understand your perspective, but sometimes the most valuable advisors are people who can provide contrarian viewpoints, who can challenge assumptions and help you avoid pitfalls. We have plenty of people who challenge our assumptions. What we don't need are people who dismissed our core mission when it required vision instead of validation. The rejection was polite but firm. Sandra left disappointed, and I felt a satisfaction that was probably petty but entirely justified. That afternoon, I walked through our production facility, watching our machines create packaging that would decompose into nutrients for gardens around the world. Employees who'd believed in the vision from the beginning were training new hires, expanding our capacity, and improving our processes. Marcus was in the business development bullpen, on a call with a potential client, enthusiastically explaining the environmental benefits of our seed-infused containers. People who'd laughed at my dreams were now working to make them reality. People who'd dismissed the vision were now asking to be part of it. And people who'd told me to stick to my stable job were watching me build something that mattered. The revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet and complete. Success so undeniable that the doubters had no choice but to acknowledge they'd been wrong. Rate this quiet revenge 0-10 in the comments. What's the most satisfying way someone who doubted you eventually acknowledged your success? It's been 3 years since that first LinkedIn message from Marcus, and as I sit in my corner office, now in our second headquarters, with 150 employees across 3 locations, I'm still processing everything that's happened. EcoWrap Solutions went public last month. Our IPO raised $200 million, valuing the company at $1.2 billion. We're now the leading supplier of biodegradable packaging in North America, with expansion plans for Europe and Asia. Marcus is still with us, now promoted to Director of Strategic Partnerships. He's good at his job, and more importantly, he's become a genuine advocate for our mission. Sometimes I catch him in meetings, passionately explaining to potential clients why sustainable packaging matters for the planet, not just their bottom line. The enthusiasm is real now, not performative. Dr. Martinez, our CTO, just published a research paper about our latest innovation, packaging that doesn't just biodegrade, but actually captures carbon from the atmosphere as it breaks down. We're calling it carbon-negative packaging, and pre-orders are already exceeding our production capacity. But the most meaningful moment came last month, at our company retreat. I was giving the keynote address to our entire team, talking about our journey from a crazy idea in a Target aisle to a publicly traded company. As I looked out at the audience, I saw faces that represented every stage of our growth. Dr. Martinez, who'd believed in the science from the beginning. Amy Rodriguez, who'd become not just our first customer, but also joined our board of directors. Lisa Thompson, our operations manager, who'd taken a risk leaving a stable corporate job to help us scale. And dozens of other employees who'd joined us when we were still small and unproven. But I also saw Marcus, applauding enthusiastically from the middle section. Sandra Williams wasn't there. She'd eventually started her own consulting firm, specializing in sustainable packaging strategy. The irony wasn't lost on me. 5 years ago, I said to the audience, I had a crazy idea and no credibility. People laughed at me, dismissed me, and told me to stick to safer choices. And you know what? They weren't necessarily wrong to be skeptical. Most startups fail. Most crazy ideas don't work out. I paused, looking around the room at all the faces. But what they got wrong was thinking that skepticism should stop innovation. That because something was difficult and uncertain, it wasn't worth pursuing. They confused prudence with vision, and they mistook current limitations for permanent barriers. After my speech, people came up to congratulate me and share their own stories. But the conversation that meant the most was with Jake. Yes, Jake, my ex-boyfriend who'd given me the ultimatum between him and my business dreams. He'd reached out a few months earlier, asking if we could meet for coffee. I'd been curious enough to say yes. Emma, I owe you an apology, he said as we sat in a cafe not far from where Marcus and I had our fateful meeting years ago. I was wrong about your business, but more importantly, I was wrong about what it meant to support someone you claim to love. He looked genuinely remorseful. I was scared of the financial risk, scared of the uncertainty, but instead of dealing with my own fears, I tried to make you give up your dreams. Jake, we both made mistakes in that relationship, I said, but you're right that asking me to choose between you and my dreams wasn't fair. I should have supported you even if I was scared. That's what partners do. It was a mature conversation, and I was glad we'd had it. Jake had married someone else and seemed happy in his stable, predictable life. There were no hard feelings anymore, just the recognition that we'd wanted very different things. But the conversation made me think about all the people who'd supported me along the way, even when it was difficult or uncertain. My parents had eventually come around, once they saw I was building something sustainable, pun intended. My mom now introduces herself as Emma's mother at social events, which is both embarrassing and sweet. Jenna, my best friend who'd initially been skeptical, had become one of our biggest cheerleaders. She'd even invested in our Series A funding round and joined our marketing team as a consultant. But the person who deserved the most credit was Dr. Martinez. She'd believed in the science and the mission from the beginning, taking equity instead of consulting fees when I couldn't afford to pay market rates. Her faith in both the technology and my ability to execute had made everything else possible. Last week, I spoke at my old university's entrepreneurship program. Standing in front of 50 bright, eager business students, I tried to share the most important lessons I'd learned. The hardest part of starting a company isn't the logistics or the funding or even the competition, I said. It's maintaining belief in yourself when everyone else thinks you're wrong. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. But how do you know when people are wrong to doubt you versus when you're wrong to ignore their concerns? It was a smart question, and I thought about it carefully before answering. You don't know, I said finally. That's what makes entrepreneurship terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. But here's what I learned. If you're solving a real problem, if you're willing to work harder than anyone else, and if you're honest about your limitations while still believing in your vision, then the doubters are probably wrong about you, even if they're right about the risks. I looked around the classroom at all those hopeful faces. Some of you will start companies, some will fail, and that's okay. Failure teaches you things that success can't. But some of you will succeed beyond anything you can imagine right now. And when you do, remember to be kind to the people who doubted you. They weren't necessarily wrong to be cautious. They just couldn't see what you could see. After the talk, several students approached me with their own business ideas. I listened to each one, offered feedback and encouragement, and tried to give them what I'd wished for in those early days. Someone who took their dreams seriously. Driving home that evening, I thought about the LinkedIn message that started this whole reflection. Marcus's application, which had seemed so absurd at the time, had actually worked out well for everyone. He'd found meaningful work at a company he believed in, and we'd gained a dedicated team member who'd learned not to dismiss innovation too quickly. The revenge I'd fantasized about in those early days, proving the doubters wrong, watching them admit their mistakes, having them ask to be part of what they'd mocked, had happened exactly as I'd imagined. But it had been less satisfying and more complicated than I'd expected. Because here's what I learned. Proving people wrong feels good for about 5 minutes. Building something meaningful that lasts feels good forever. The real victory wasn't that Marcus now worked for me, or that Sandra had been shut out of our success, or that Jake had to admit he'd been wrong about my potential. The real victory was the hundreds of thousands of packages we'd kept out of landfills, the carbon we'd captured, the gardens that were now growing from our biodegradable containers. The real victory was creating jobs for 150 people who believed in making the world better. It was the emails from customers telling us how much their communities loved our plantable packaging. It was the partnerships we'd formed with environmental organizations and the research we'd funded into next-generation sustainable materials. EcoWrap Solutions had become bigger than my need to prove anyone wrong. It had become exactly what I'd envisioned in that Target aisle 5 years ago, a company that made the world a little bit better. Tonight, I'm working late in my office, reviewing proposals for our next product line, biodegradable electronics packaging that breaks down into components that can feed beneficial bacteria in soil. It's ambitious, maybe even a little crazy. I'm sure some people will think it's impractical. They'll probably be wrong. But if they're not, if this new venture fails spectacularly, I'll still be proud of what we built with EcoWrap, because we took a crazy idea and made it real. We proved that business success and environmental responsibility aren't mutually exclusive. And we showed that sometimes the people who laugh at your dreams end up asking to be part of them. The best revenge isn't proving the doubters wrong. It's building something so meaningful that their doubt becomes irrelevant. As I finish reviewing the proposals and prepare to head home, I smile thinking about all the young entrepreneurs out there right now, sitting in coffee shops and spare bedrooms, working on ideas that other people think are impossible. Some of those ideas really are impossible, but some of them will change the world. I hope the dreamers don't give up when people laugh. I hope they remember that today's impossibility is often tomorrow's breakthrough. And I hope they're kind to their doubters when they succeed, because everyone deserves the chance to evolve, to recognize innovation, and to be part of something bigger than their initial skepticism. The future belongs to the people who can see possibilities that others can't. The revenge of the dreamer isn't cruelty toward the doubters, it's the gentle satisfaction of making the impossible inevitable. Rate this story 0-10 in the comments below. Have you ever turned doubt into determination? What's your impossible dream that you're working on right now? Remember, today's crazy idea could be tomorrow's breakthrough. Don't let the doubters stop you from changing the world.